Hey everybody, and welcome back to another compilation style video. This one is going to be on every time the New York Mets did something embarrassing in 2025. Now, as this is previously recorded content, there will be times I present facts or narratives that may seem a bit outdated, but that shouldn't affect the overall content within very much, as it exists in a relative vacuum. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoy, and have a happy new year. I've been debating all day today on whether or not I wanted to make a video about the actions of Juan Soto yesterday, because I've seen so many people talking about it online, and I honestly don't want to add to a narrative that I think might be a bit overblown. But after examining the footage on a couple different plays, as well as seeing a couple takes that I thought were valid on the whole situation, I decided I'd go ahead and talk about it, with it being the fact that Juan Soto probably just had his single laziest contest as a member of the Mets. Things got started in the first when Aaron Judge hit this fly ball down the right field line, a ball that had an expected batting average of just 166. You heard me correctly, 166, but due to the fact that Soto was just kinda lackadaisically sauntering after it, it ended up dropping in and then bouncing out of the field of play for a ground rule double. And yeah, obviously the guy's not a good fielder, this is known, but it didn't end there, as later in the contest with the score tied 2-2 in the top of the 8th, he would be up versus Devin Williams, taking a weak swing on a 1-1 pitch, in the process grounding it weakly up the middle. DJ LeMahieu then made a nice sliding stop before fumbling with the ball, yet still having enough time to flip it to first to get the lefty. How is this even possible, you might ask? Well, not only did he not hustle out of the box, but even after seeing LeMahieu was fumbling with it, he still didn't turn on whatever jets he had to try to reach. There was obviously that moment with the grand slam in the bottom of the inning as well, but honestly I don't think that was really a lack of effort, more so just bad timing. I will admit he certainly looked discouraged after the play, but that's not necessarily atypical considering the magnitude of the moment. The last thing I see as relevant I want to bring up was from this post on Twitter by 4 Trained Savages, which does a good job of summarizing my last angle, even if the original intention of it was a little troll. He just didn't have any swag all series, something he had in spades last season. At the time, I think this strongly helped make up for the fact that he does have some of these lackadaisical plays sometimes. I don't know exactly what's up with him right now, but I do hope he's able to get it figured out soon enough. As being a general baseball fan without a horse in the New York versus New York race, I'd personally really like to see him have a strong first impression for the Mets, as he attempts to embark on his decade-and-a-half quest to make that gargantuan, historic contract worth it. The Mets and Yankees had a hard-fought game yesterday, even if the final score didn't end up reflecting it, as the contest was actually tied 2-2 going into the 8th inning, courtesy of a first-inning 2-run double off the bat of Cody Bellinger, who would be a big player later in the contest, and the exploits of the Mets' Jeff McNeil, who would not only register the only RBI hit off of ace Max Fried, but would also manage to manufacture a run himself, scoring with 2 outs in the 5th after a curveball got away from Austin Wells. But despite this pretty normal sequence of events to get us to the 8th, something would happen in this frame that would be the catalyst for an epic Mets collapse, and it was a bit out of the ordinary. Pete Alonso, at one of the most critical points possible, made one of the worst throws to home plate I've ever seen. Preceding the play, runners run first and second with 1 out and rookie Jorbit Vivas at the dish. I don't want to gloss over the overall at-bat here as well, as this was easily one of the grittier plate appearances of the season so far, as Vivas would work Ryan Stanek for 11 separate pitches, which included 6 foul balls. Finally, the lefty would ground one to the right that Alonso at first picked up and then did this, making a throw reminiscent of this one from Javier Baez. And it's important to keep in mind, he was already pulled in tight here on the infield, making this one of the lower distances anybody's gonna have to throw on a major league field. I think this Mets fan's reaction summarized the whole thing pretty well, as well as Pete's own disgust with himself following. Things would quickly go from bad to worse after Paul Goldschmidt would line an RBI single, with the final blow coming off the bat of the aforementioned Bellinger, who would manage to sneak a Genesis Cabrera fastball over the head of Juan Soto in right field for a game-breaking grand slam, pushing the score to 8-2, which would end up being our final after Anthony Volpe handled this ground ball in the top of the 9th, helping the Yankees to win the first leg of the Subway Series 2-1. But oh, how things could have been different if Pete had just been able to make a routine throw home, instead of what might be the worst throw to this base from a guy at his position I've personally ever seen. Juan Soto has had a rough start to the year at the plate by his standards, largely because of some insanely bad luck and the dead ball phenomena plaguing all of MLB. And while he has also come under some fire for his lack of hustle at times, you can't really debate what his base running performance has been so far this season, as he already has 8 stolen bases and a base running run value of 1, when he's never had even a single season in his career above 0 before this. But it was yesterday versus the Braves that he registered one of the ugliest base running mistakes of the entire season, and then chose to blame the field umpire. But before we get there, let's start with the game itself. It was actually Soto who got the Mets off to a fast start in this one, crushing a hanging breaking ball in a 1-1 out to center field. His 14th of the year, pushing his average to .340 in June with 5 home runs already, which is more than he had all of April and only 1 off from May. Tyrone Taylor would then come up in the top of the second with 2 guys on and 2 out, and pop a shallow fly ball into right field that Acuna Jr. came in on, diving unsuccessfully, allowing the second run of the game to score for New York. The Braves managed to answer back in the third when Matt Olson flipped the ball into center field to cut into the lead, but the Mets were right back at it in the top of the 5th when Tyrone Taylor did more damage with a home run. At this point, it seemed like the game was pretty firmly in New York's hands, and it would stay that way until the bottom of the 8th when Atlanta rallied for 3 runs to tie the game, with the major blow being a 2-run double by Marcell Ozuna. This brings us to the top of the 9th, with Soto again at the plate, facing lefty Dylan Lee and crushing a fastball right down the middle into right field at 111 miles an hour. Pete Alonso came up with the chance to be a hero, and for a second, it looked like he delivered, crushing a fly ball to deep right field that sent Ronald Acuna racing back onto the track before leaping at the wall, registering a fantastic catch for the superstar. But it was then that he noticed Soto well off the bag at first, so he calmly made a simple throw, resulting in one of the funnier looking double plays you'll ever see. Just look at this. In the moment, it seemed hard to understand what he was thinking, as I don't know if I've ever seen a guy making gestures like this while running the bases before, and certainly not before getting thrown out. It was after the game that Soto would provide a little context, apparently choosing to put the blame on the field umpire, saying, "We rely on the umpires. We wait on them to make the call. The goal is look for the umpire and make sure he gets the call right. But I feel like he took way too long to make the decision, and it put me in a tough spot." There's 2 main issues I have with this statement. The first one being, why was he so far off the bag if he had no clue whether the ball was caught or not? If he was halfway to second, he could have gotten back relatively easily. And the second one is that he didn't look at his first base coach, who, while he isn't able to be seen on the broadcast, was apparently gesturing for Soto to get back to the bag, according to a few fans who were at the game. This ended up being a highly consequential play as well, as the Mets would go on to lose this contest on a walk-off from Austin Riley in the bottom of the 10th. Little side note, but shout out Taylor for running this ball down despite the fact it really had no bearing on the game. Maybe if Soto remains on first instead of getting thrown out on that double play, things could have been different. But at the very least, it's certainly a moment that can't feel good for a Mets fan base coming off a sweep in the series before, and well on their way to losing another game tonight. Just 2 weeks ago, the New York Mets were going back and forth with the Detroit Tigers for the best overall record in baseball, with a solid lead in their division as well. Things were great, but since the series against the Rays on June 13th, they have gone 3-13, seeing the Phillies catch up to them, then overtake them in the East in the process. However, even a slump this extreme isn't historic, right? We've seen better teams go colder for longer before. But in their most recent series versus the Pirates, they actually did manage to achieve a level of struggle that was not only the peak of embarrassment, but downright singular in the whole of baseball history. I'll unveil more of the record-setting details at the end, but first, let's take a brief look at each of the games in this 3-game set. David Peterson began for New York by giving up 4 runs in the second inning of Game 1, to the bottom of the order of one of the worst offensive teams in baseball no less. Still, with the rest of the game to go, it was conceivable the Mets could make some kind of comeback, and they did manage to claw within 3 with a home run from the red-hot Juan Soto in the 4th inning. Unfortunately for them, no one else would be able to get it going on offense, meaning that when Pittsburgh knocked in at least 1 run per inning between the 5th and the 7th, including a 3 spot in the 6th, it was pretty much over, with the final score coming in at 9-1, a truly ugly showing considering they'd won their final 2 games in Atlanta by a combined score of 11-3. The series was still up for grabs, however, and they even got off to a decent start offensively in Game 2, with Soto again providing the spark with an RBI single in the 1st inning. But they again wouldn't be able to execute very well on the mound, starting in the 2nd, with the bottom of the Pirates' order again coming through to score 3 runs. New York would manage to hold it here for the next 4 innings, with their bullpen really showing out for a stretch, even managing to bring the score within 1 when Brandon Nimmo notched his own RBI single in the 5th inning. Could they finally be about to turn things around? Well, not so fast. In the 8th, they would not only give up a couple runs to the lower half of the batting order again, but then a few to the top as well, resulting in a 6-run inning, putting the game fundamentally out of reach. And while I'm sure more than a few Mets fans here were furious with their pitching, and rightfully so, their offense was really making things difficult, forcing the guys on the bump to have to be perfect out there to even give their team a chance, something the Pirates are a little more used to doing. So, Game 3 rolls around. Could they manage to even salvage a single contest? Hell, could they go the first couple of frames without caving in? The answer to both of those would be a resounding no, as they proceeded to see Frankie Montas, making his 2nd appearance of the year in return from injury, give up 5 runs in the 1st inning alone, including back-to-back home runs to the struggling O'Neal Cruz and veteran underperformer Tommy Pham, which, by the way, was just Pham's 2nd dinger of the year so far. He would be able to complete 4 innings when it all was said and done, though not without giving up another run, departing with New York now trailing 6-0. And there was no redemption coming their way, as they proceeded to follow a Luis Torrens home run by surrendering exactly 2 runs in the 5th, 7th, and 8th innings, with the final score coming in at a series worst 12-1. As you can tell from just these brief breakdowns, they were fundamentally dominated by Pittsburgh in pretty much every facet of the game. But it perhaps isn't self-evidently clear just to what level this was, being one of the historic variety, as according to Greg Harvey on Twitter, this was the first time in MLB history that a team scored more than 30 runs, allowed 4 or fewer, and struck out 25 plus batters in a 3-game series, all of which, of course, were dropped on the heads of the guys in blue, orange, and gray. What a disastrous series, and a horrible stretch of play that Met fans can only hope doesn't continue into the second half of the season. The New York Mets are having one hell of a skid right now, dropping 6 games in a row, 9 of their last 10, and going back to June 13th, 18 of 47, or a .383 winning percentage that ranks 3rd worst in all of MLB, behind just the Nationals and Rockies. And yeah, Mets fans probably thought things couldn't get any worse after their series opening loss to the Brewers, where they saw their potential tying run get gunned out at the plate in the form of Starling Marte, a guy with 29th percentile speed, while a player with 95th percentile wheels, Tyrone Taylor, sat on the bench. But it was yesterday's contest that was arguably even worse, because not only did they find a way to blow it when it mattered most, they did so twice, while also having to witness one of the weirder assumed outs into home runs you'll ever see, with all this leading to one of the happiest guys in baseball, Francisco Lindor, downright crashing out in the dugout. We'll start in the beginning, with New York getting off to a fast start, with the first run of the game coming in the second inning when Pete Alonso took Tobias Myers deep to center field, tying the Mets' all-time record for big flies at 252. Unfortunately for them, they wouldn't be able to add on after Lindor took a changeup that was probably a little inside for strike 3. It was in the bottom of the second that Frankie Montas would end up loading the bases with 2 outs, but for a moment it seemed like he might get out of it when Joey Ortiz bounced a ground ball to shortstop. But Francisco Lindor wouldn't be able to make the play, seeing it bounce off his mitt before immediately going into a crouch position. It was in between innings that we would see him come into the dugout and slam his mitt down in a moment of frustration we've rarely ever seen from Mr. Smile. Seriously, the whole team is frustrated right now, and if you needed any evidence, there it is. Things would go back and forth for the next 4.5 innings, with the Mets eventually taking a 4-3 lead on a home run from Juan Soto. But like we've seen from Milwaukee for the better part of 3 months now, they would just not go away, eventually tying the game on a fielder's choice ground out to shortstop, putting a potential go-ahead run at third with 2 outs. This brought deadline acquisition Ryan Helsley to the mound, and he did his job, inducing a routine grounder to Ronnie Mauricio at third. But again, the Mets' bad fielding would show out, with the rookie olaying the ball into left field, giving the Brewers the lead. But they weren't done with the heartbreak, as versus the very next hitter, William Contreras, Helsley would deliver a first pitch fastball that was whacked in the air to right field, where Juan Soto managed to track it down for the final out of the inning. Or was it? Because apparently there was a pitch clock violation on Ryan, meaning that the at-bat would continue. And, wouldn't you know it, on the very next offering, Contreras would take advantage, smashing a high fastball to left center field, pushing their lead to 3 runs. And that's where things would end, with Lindor and Soto punching out back-to-back to officially seal a 7-4 loss for New York, prolonging their slump and pushing Philly's division lead to now 4.5 games. In case you haven't been watching baseball this year for some reason, the New York Mets are experiencing one of the biggest fall-offs of what looked to be a truly impressive season that we've ever seen. Not only are they currently on a 7-game losing streak, but as pointed out by Jeff Passan on Twitter, since they started out 45-24, the best record in baseball, they have proceeded to go 31-47, one of the worst. And it's gotten so bad in Queens that an opposing announcer just openly mocked them after they made yet another embarrassing play while down big early in a contest. Jacob deGrom was set to face the Mets in Citi Field for the first time since he left before the 2023 season, and in classic Mets fashion, they would have to watch as the Rangers put up 6 runs in the top of the first, chasing rookie phenom Jonah Tong in the process, while simultaneously registering something that had never happened one time during Jacob's own stint in New York while he was pitching. After a quiet frame by deGrom in the bottom half of that inning, the Rangers broadcast didn't hold back on what kind of shock it must have been for Mets fans who were just a few minutes late getting into the stadium.
You know, it can be tough to get to a game on time, especially here in New York. I think the people that are walking into the stadium go, no, we're 15, 20 minutes late, we'll be okay. And they sit down like, 6? Did they? What?
This was immediately preceding a play where, with 2 outs, Jake Burger flipped a sinker to Pete Alonso, who fielded it on a hop before seeing his hurler nowhere close to the base as Burger neared it. At this point, instead of eating it, he decided to make a throw anyway, nearly hitting Huascar Brazoban in the head as it flew past him, then trickled into the dugout to give the hitter a free base. Now, this obviously was an embarrassing play, period, right? I mean, look at it. But I want you to listen to how the Rangers broadcast reacted as it occurred, and then their comments on the fallout immediately after.
Keeping up on the app or something, as this one is flared on a hop right side, and Brazoban doesn't get to first. They throw it anyway, and that one goes into the seats. The Mets are Metsing.
And as a coaching staff, it's tough to keep your composure right now. You have to.
When your franchise has a custom verb to describe your sloppy, downright bizarre behavior, you know something's going wrong on a fundamental level, and this is reflected in how long of a poor stretch they've had over the summer, as detailed by Passan in the intro. As you'd expect, they'd go on to lose this contest 8-3, with one final indecency being the fact that this is the most run support that DeGrom had ever received at Citi Field. And of course, it only came after the modern legend had departed for another team. Now, before we go, I wanted to do a little mini shout out for Roki Sasaki, who just seemingly decided to turn his gas back up to previously observed levels, punching out 8 batters through 4 2/3 innings with sharp off-speed stuff and, most importantly, a fastball that routinely touched 100 miles an hour. All of a sudden, he took himself from a borderline disappointment that was publicly acknowledged by Dave Roberts to, seemingly, being on the fast track back to the big leagues, though more than likely in a relief role. This is a welcome development for a player who had been experiencing one of the sharper fall-offs we've seen for a prospect in recent memory, but now seems poised to potentially reclaim his place as one of the most intriguing young pitchers in baseball. The New York Mets were fresh off of arguably their best win of the year that involved a massive comeback punctuated by a go-ahead home run by Francisco Alvarez and a 6-out save from Edwin Diaz. With this victory, they managed to catapult themselves back into a playoff position, though only tentatively so. As such, the importance of winning every game from here on out cannot be overstated. But that would not be what happened yesterday, when they not only got down huge early, courtesy of one of their rookie phenoms getting rocked, but then also had to watch as one of the brightest young stars in the game embarrass them in a way you almost never see. After a scoreless top of the first, it looked like things might get ugly immediately, with Chicago putting 2 guys on with nobody out. But starter Jonah Tong would settle down to strike out Ian Happ on a nasty 3-2 changeup. Moises Ballesteros would then ground a curveball into center field, a play that somehow saw Tyrone Taylor make a perfect throw to home plate to beat Michael Busch after a replay review. Seiya Suzuki would ground out shortly after. Could New York take this momentum and turn it into anything? Well, no. Not only would they not manage to score over the next 2 innings, but it would be the Cubs that would be right back to causing issues in the third, this time loading the bases with nobody out, meaning that when Ian Happ drove a changeup down the right field line, its impact was catastrophic, scoring 2 runs and keeping 2 guys on. Ballesteros would then come up and get his second hit of the game, driving in another run. Seiya Suzuki would finally manage to drive Tong from the game with his RBI double, bringing Dick Lovelady to the mound, and the lefty would do his best to limit the damage, only giving up 1 more tally after a strikeout, sacrifice fly, and strikeout. While this hole was big, the Mets had overcome something almost exactly the same the night before, so it wasn't impossible. But it didn't help that Matt Shaw would make the lead 6-0 in the very next frame on a long drive to left center field. However, shortly after, New York would get another Alvarez bomb, but after Clay Holmes was brought on in a relief capacity, he would give up a 2-out grounder to third base, a play that should have been routine for Mark Vientos. But after he bounced the throw to first, it would get past Pete Alonso, scoring another while pushing the speedy outfielder to second. This is where we come to our highlighted play, as on the 1-0 to the next batter, Holmes bounced a sinker about a foot in front of the plate, careening wildly to the backstop, and then, for some reason, the big righty wouldn't see fit to cover home, allowing PCA to race around the bases to score on a wild pitch from second, one of the rarest plays you'll see in Major League Baseball, especially in the middle of a playoff race. Crow Armstrong would then hit the sleeping celebration, only adding to the embarrassment for New York, and things really wouldn't get any better from here, as the final score in the game would end up being 10-3. But, in a funny twist, the Mets actually caught a break on this day, because both the Reds and D-backs lost, allowing them to maintain their berth at least for another game. The Mets have been arguably the most frustrating team for their respective fan base this year in my opinion. From being one of the best teams in baseball through the season's first half to one of the worst in the second, to go along with downright horrible performance for most of their big trade acquisitions. And they arguably just hit the lowest point of their season yesterday when they fell off position for a wild card again. And their broadcast crew let them hear about it with an honesty that was both refreshing and downright brutal. Facing the Marlins in basically a must-win game, they would get out to a fast start versus Sandy Alcantara, with Francisco Lindor crushing a home run in the second pitch of the ball game before Juan Soto followed with a single and stolen base. A batter later, it was Pete Alonso's turn to come through, grounding an 0-2 changeup down the left field line. Pete would be stranded at second, but they had 2 guys on in the top of the second, a prime opportunity to add on. However, they wouldn't be able to do so when Lindor crushed a line drive to first base, with Luis Torrens getting doubled off in the process. Shortly after, Brett Beatty, their third baseman, would be removed with right side soreness. They were back to threatening again in the third when Soto led off with a single, then again stole second base, putting him just 2 swipes away from a 40-40 season. But the Mets again would strand another runner in scoring position, even after moving him up to third with 1 out, as Alonso and McNeil struck out back-to-back to end the frame. Rookie Brandon Sproat, meanwhile, had been dealing on the mound through the game's first 4 frames, not allowing much in the way of traffic and nothing in the way of runs. The fifth wouldn't be so kind to him though, as he proceeded to give up 3 straight hits to lead off the frame, tying the game and pushing the go-ahead run to third. The righty would then bounce back to get a ground ball to first. Hit too hard to push anything across. This was where the shenanigans began, as Jacob Marcy followed with basically the exact same ground ball to first base, only this time Alonso would see it go off his mitt, and even though Jeff McNeil helped him recover in time to get the out, the Marlins now had the lead. After Agustin Ramirez flipped a flare into left field, Sproat's day was done, bringing on lefty trade acquisition Gregory Soto. And from here, all hell broke loose. First, Ramirez would take second by getting one of the biggest leads you'll ever see, then do the same with third. Soto made 0 throws in response, though on the second one it really wasn't his fault, as Ronnie Mauricio, their new player at the hot corner, wasn't even covering the bag. That meant that when Xavier Edwards grounded a single into center field, he easily scored on a play that normally would have just pushed him to third at the most. That deflated everybody in Metland, including the broadcast crew, who had this to say following the implosion.
I mean, you might take your whole travel ball squad off the field if something like that happened. Here's a team that is fighting to get to October. What are you going to do in October with an inning like that?
Just brutal as hell, but in my opinion, completely justified. Connor Norby would then add insult to injury by crushing an inner half sinker way out to left field, a no-doubter that pushed things even further out of reach. Their offense would have one final big chance in this one, when with 2 outs in the 8th and the bases loaded, Mark Vientos would pop out to shortstop Otto Lopez, induced by the outright maniac Tyler Phillips, arguably MLB's most locked-in player. They would then proceed to go down 1-2-3 in the 9th, again dropping them out of their wildcard spot thanks to a win by Cincinnati and Milwaukee. And yes, there still are a couple games to play, but right now, things are looking pretty bleak in Queens. Now, before I go, I just wanted to shout out Mike Trout yesterday for crushing 2 home runs in Anaheim's comeback win versus the Astros, a victory that had to be extra satisfying for the Halos considering this series essentially is must-win for Houston. As for Trout, when you take into account that his underlying numbers are still very impressive despite some surface regression, I think he could very well be in for a rebound season in 2026, as he continues to put the finishing touches on what is already a first-ballot Hall of Fame career. It's over. Done and dusted, the 2025 New York Mets just clinched one of the worst collapses in Major League Baseball history, and they did it in today's game, in a manner that has to have driven their fan base crazy, as it came in a sickeningly familiar way. Before we go any further, it has to be stated to further back up the context of this heartbreak that the Reds, who had to lose for New York to have a chance, were losing for most of the day, meaning in the backdrop of their own contest, the Mets players had to know that if they found a way to win, they'd probably be in. But, as you'll see, this didn't help much. The first major blow of the day would be in the top of the third, when, with 1 out and 2 guys on, their best player and near 40-40 man, Juan Soto, grounded into a double play. In a microcosm of what would be their luck on the day, the ball was hit at 106 miles an hour, but it was right to the shifted shortstop. And an inning and a half later, after Xavier Edwards made a nice backhanded stop to rob Pete Alonso, things would get going for the Marlins, who saw Eric Wagman drive a ball deep to the left center field gap off of Ryan Stanek, driving in Connor Norby from first base. If the pitching staff had been able to keep it here, however, it would have been the end of the world, but as has been typical of the Mets bullpen in the second half, this wouldn't be the case, as Brian Navarreto would drive a slider right down the middle to straightaway center field with 2 outs, pushing across another run. This brought trade acquisition Tyler Rogers to the mound, seeking to keep things close. But he too would not have any measure of success, giving up an RBI triple, this time to Javier Sanoja on a rising slider down the left field line. You can already qualify this as a meltdown somewhat, but at least it was still within a save opportunity, right? This would quickly change, however, when Xavier Edwards drove another stake firmly into the hearts of Mets fans everywhere with a flare single to center field. If the guys in blue, orange, and gray wanted to come back, they'd have to do it in a major way. And for a moment in the 5th, it looked like they might do so when Pete Alonso came to the plate with the bases loaded and crushed his hardest hit ball of the year, a 116-mile-per-hour missile to left field that almost took the glove hand off of Sanoja. But alas, he made the catch, stranding 3 runners. The next 2.5 innings would go off without much in the way of action, as a couple New York base runners reached, but there never really was any significant traffic. This would not be the case in the 8th inning, however, when Alonso managed to reach on a single and Vientos drew a walk. Would this be the time they could finally rally? Well, as you'd expect based on how the last 3 months have gone, the answer to that would be a resounding no, as Francisco Alvarez would K on a slider that would have loaded the bases after Jeff McNeil had already struck out. That bat that suffered Alvarez's wrath immediately after was probably emblematic of how most of the players in that clubhouse currently feel. Broken. New York would have one final chance to salvage their season, and with 1 out and a guy on, it was the top of the order's job to keep things going, with Mr. Smile, clubhouse leader, at the dish. But on the 0-1, he would do the worst thing possible in that circumstance, grounding a ball hard to second base, where it was turned into a season-ending double play, with him not even running full speed through the bag. And with that, a team that was 45-24 on June 12th, holding a 5.5 game lead in the NL East with the lowest ERA in Major League Baseball and the 4th highest OPS, missed the playoffs entirely just 3.5 months later, courtesy of one of the biggest collapses we have ever seen at the Major League level.
Alright everybody, if you made it this far, I appreciate you watching, and if you did, consider checking out any of these other videos on your screen right now for other content just like this. Also, if you ever see anything you'd like to see me detail in the video, feel free to reach out to my email, basebpoet@gmail.com, and if I end up using your idea, I'll give you a shout out. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.